Have you ever heard people on the news talk about the yield curve and just kind of nod along wondering what on earth they're talking about? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break this whole thing down. By the end, you'll get the four key forces that shape it and what it's really telling us about what's coming next.
All right, here's the game plan. We'll start with the big question, then we'll look at the four forces and the three main theories that try to explain the curve. After that, we'll see how they all mix together to create different shapes, and we'll wrap it all up with a unified explanation that ties everything together.
All right, first up, decoding the curve. Let's get right to the heart of the matter.
This is the core question, right? Why does it usually slope up? Why does it sometimes flatten out? And the big one, why does it occasionally flip upside down? If we can get a handle on this, we can start to understand what the market is trying to tell us about the economy's future.
So, to answer our big question, we first have to understand the basic building blocks, the ingredients, if you will. So think of these four things as the only ingredients in our recipe. You've got the time premium, the risk premium, the liquidity premium, and finally, maybe the most important one, expectations. It's the unique mix of these four that creates the curve's final shape at any given moment.
Okay, so we've got our four ingredients. Now let's look at the three main recipes, or theories, that economists use to explain how they all get combined.
Now, this is really useful because it neatly maps each theory to our key ingredients. The market segmentation theory, that's all about time and risk. The liquidity preference theory focuses on, well, you guessed it, liquidity. And the expectations theory is all about that crystal ball stuff, what we think is going to happen next. Let's quickly break them down.
So this theory basically says that a 2-year loan and a 30-year loan are two totally different animals in two separate markets. And to convince an investor to lock their money away for a longer time or to take on more risk, you simply have to pay them more. It's pretty straightforward.
This one just makes sense. You know, most people would rather have their cash accessible sooner rather than later. So if you want them to tie up their money for 10, 20, or 30 years, you've got to offer them a little something extra. That's the liquidity premium, for giving up all that flexibility.
And this last one is all about peering into the future. It argues that a 10-year interest rate today isn't just a random number. It's actually a reflection of what the entire market thinks short-term rates are going to be on average for the next 10 years. It's like the market's collective best guess.
Okay, so we've got our ingredients and our recipes. Now for the fun part. Let's see what happens when we actually put it all together and cook up the different curve shapes we see in the real world.
First up, the most common shape you're going to see, the normal upward sloping curve. Generally speaking, this is what a healthy economy looks like.
And here's what that looks like. It's simple, right? Short-term yields are low, and as you go further out in time, the longer-term yields get higher. This is the market rewarding investors for taking on the risk of committing their money for a longer period.
So how do we get this shape? Well, a normal curve happens when all four of our forces are basically pointing in the same direction. Investors are demanding more pay for time, for risk, and for giving up liquidity. And on top of that, their expectations for the future are pretty stable. Everything's working together. But what happens when some of those forces start pulling in opposite directions? Well, then you can get a flat yield curve. And that often signals a whole lot of uncertainty. With a flat curve, there's very little difference between short-term and long-term yields. The market is basically shrugging its shoulders and saying, doesn't really matter if you invest for 1 year or 10 years. The reward is about the same. A flat curve is a sign of a real tug of war. For instance, you might have the normal demand for higher premiums for time and risk, but that's getting canceled out because investors are suddenly getting worried and want the safety of locking in a long-term rate. The forces are at a stalemate.
And now, for the one that makes all the headlines and gets economists really nervous, the inverted curve. This is when the whole logic of the market seems to get flipped completely on its head.
Yep, you're seeing that right. This is that bizarre upside-down world where you get paid more for a short-term loan than a long-term one. It's a really powerful signal, and historically, it's been a pretty reliable predictor of an economic slowdown. So how on earth does this happen? It happens when one force, expectations, becomes so powerful that it just steamrolls everything else. The market becomes overwhelmingly convinced that a recession is coming and that interest rates are going to have to be slashed in the future. That belief is so strong it pushes long-term rates down, way down, so far down that they actually fall below short-term rates.
Okay, so we've gone through all of that. What's the one big key takeaway from all of this?
And this is it, right here. This is the unified theory. It's not about one single theory being right and the others being wrong. The real answer is that it's the constant, dynamic push and pull between all four of those forces: time, risk, liquidity, and expectations, that gives the curve its shape.
And that's the real power here. Once you understand these four forces, you're not just looking at a line on a chart anymore. You're actually reading a story about risk, about time, and about what the market collectively believes is coming next.
So the next time you see the yield curve in the news, don't just see a line. Ask yourself, okay, what's the story here? What's going on with time, risk, liquidity, and expectations? Because now you have the tools to figure it out.